How about the taste and smell?
Hi, how are you?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing well.
Oh, and we are currently using Ethernet to USB converter that you made available in the internet. It's just like, just thank you.
I know I'm not sure how much help I really would have.
Excellent, thank you.
Yeah, tomorrow you might be really good again, but we might be crap again.
I just want to mention that we are streaming tonight's event on Facebook. So it's live right now. So, well, conversations can be picked up over the mic. So, you know, just so you're aware. Yeah, absolutely, Chad.
Yeah, I heard that. It should take a little while to get back. Just ready to see. Oh my God. They got them that late? Yeah. 9 p.m. or 5 a.m. Oh, because that was all the I got my booster several weeks ago in Queen at Rite Aid. It was like,
They're asking now if it's okay. People get really fussy about government funds. I'd love to hear
well, I just had my second shingle shot a couple of days ago. So I only have one more shot to go. Yeah, so I've had my Omicron. Yeah.
as far as
I think I know. Yeah. On the other side of the. All right. I'm going to check back in with Beatrice.
Yeah, he actually is doing better than he has been. Yeah, he's going to watch the live now. I'm really glad that they have that walk for
apart from college.
So in the morning,
Not a lot. I wanted to fix up the trail.
oh yeah. I didn't have very many. My guardian, planned to have it late, and then I was gonna do more, but then I had my accident, so. I have a lot of tomatoes though, like rosemary tomatoes, they're green, so I bring them inside and then they get red. So, and I did have, like, my basil bush got and I did make some pesto and stuff, but a lot of it kind of like turned black. Yeah. Next year I'll leave earlier start and whatnot.
Well, I'll follow with you. It was big businessmen, they know how to use somebody else's papers. Yes, that's confidence. Plus, of course, plenty of taxpayers that would pay
Starting about 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
My challenge now is to get these people talking to me down here.
Find out.
But you can sit anywhere you want and impersonate somebody else if you want.
I was going to take your name tag.
Oh, you were?
They'll fall for it. You want the hat too? Yeah, you can look like the rabbi. Let's get this over with.
Okay, we're going to start in time.
Wait.
2 minutes from now. So,
You guys have your signs all wrong.
Yeah.
Okay.
Wait, what?
See,
Fix it.
he's always an organizer.
there we go.
So bossy.
So we have 2 rounds of kind of discussion. One's 5 minutes, one's 2 to 3
What are you
minutes.
guys doing over there?
So I have different options to stop them from talking too long, but I know you'll behave very well.
Well, you should. What are the options? What are you going to do? You're going to throw things at us because that's
Terrifying
scary.
thing.
follow my
Terrifying thing. Want to see my terrifying thing? Ready?
Yeah. Oh,
That's what we're working towards.
I'll tell you what it says. Okay.
Good.
Oh, remember to speak up, because all these people are old.
all right. Good. I thought his
They're
son
our
was gonna say
contemporaries, and they're old. See?
Well, good evening. I extend a warm welcome to all of you here at the mill and all of you who are live streaming this event. My name is Ann Atchison, for those of you who don't know me, and I was one of the organizers for this program tonight. This summer we celebrated water at the mill, and tonight we thought we would shift the lens a bit. It's our last program of the season, and we're going to celebrate community. In 2005, all of us in Alstead and the surrounding towns experienced the power of water and its devastating effects. What arose from this was the power of a community who came together. So in the first part of this program, we've invited people, our neighbors, who were part of the leadership in leadership positions at the time of the flood to share their stories, their experiences. And then we'll have an intermission for 15 minutes, and you've probably already seen the refreshments that we have available in the office and downstairs. And then when we reconvene, we will hear from those who felt called to document the flood. The last half hour will open the floor to any of you who would like to share a brief story of your own flood experience. So that's the lay of the land tonight. And I want to invite Patient Stoddard up, who will take us through a moment of remembrance and commemoration. Thank you.
While this is envisioned as a celebration of a community sort of rising back together, it also was a time of, for some, of profound loss, and for many of different kinds of loss that touched them as a result of this unexpected disaster. But first I want to call to mind the names of the 4 members of this Alstead community who died in the flood. Sally and Tim Canfield and Spencer Petty and Bill Seal. And ask for a moment of silence while we just call them to mind and send some loving care to the members of their family and closest friends who still miss them. They are remembered well. But there are the kinds of losses that this brought to folks. Over 35 people lost, homes were lost, people lost their houses, and of course when you lose a house, you lose treasured possessions, you use tokens of memory, you lose your wardrobe, all those different pieces of one's self and identity can get washed away, and it's hard to know who you are and how to proceed with so much lost. But there was also cars and trucks that traveled down the way and were lost, gardens, tools, all sorts of things that do imbue us with a sense of place and meaning and security. Many people lost their means of income for periods of time. And there were those intangible losses, like the loss of the sense of security, that when you go to sleep at night and you wake up in the morning, you expect to see around you the familiar. And sometimes that faith in that sometimes gets a little shaky in the view of such an occurrence. But there was, in the wake of that wave that passed through town, also blessings that came. There was incredible reaching out, not just the bravery and the selflessness of the many people who did emergency service during those days, but neighbor to neighbor, small and big kindnesses as people drew together and supported one another. And it spread beyond the town. Other towns pitched in to help. And the State Highway Department came and had meetings, several meetings with people in town. And the legislature got involved. And even the governor, who made a couple of appearances in our little not usually very noticed community here. And what I think was the biggest blessing was the strengthening of the sense of community and connectedness itself. That Alstead was tested and it rose to the test. People from different circles, different ways of looking at the world, different political orientations, different lifestyles all came together and found ways to forge a new sense of community, rooted in the old but somewhat different. And it seems to me that at this time where we are such a divided culture, such a divided society, that it helps to remember that sometimes it takes a disaster to remind us of the sacredness and goodness of one another. And that I'm hoping part of the result of this hardship upon this community and this occasion is that we remember what it feels like when those barriers fall and we pull together and create something of deep worth.
Thank you, Patience. You see why I've married her 36 years ago. The focus is looking at how this community recovered, not pretending that we didn't suffer, but how the community recovered. And our first panel today, I'll introduce them in a moment, is focusing on their leadership role in helping this community recover. So I'll tell you 4 gentlemen. I've known 3 of the 4. Gentlemen, wait a moment. The gentlemen for many years, but I had to check out what's their real background. So Matt. That's actually, everyone knows Matt probably. Matt was a current select board, is a current select board member right now, but he was chair of the board in 2005.
Right. Yep.
So he came back for more action after 2005. It took a few years to recover back. And Matt is actually an incredible artist. And in the 70s, we did fine woodworking in this mill here and great furniture craftsman. So fabulous. And next is Joe. Joe, everyone knows Joe here? Anyone know Joe? Okay. He's actually said to me he's dedicated to listen to all the sides and get people to talk. Yeah. And that's it.
Sometimes I regret it.
Yes. He was a selectman then, and he's a selectman now, or select person, I guess the term is, in the board of selectmen. And he also had a lot of one of the earliest timber framers in the States, actually, in the U.S.
One of the most elderly.
Yeah, not elderly now,
Still in
but at the time you're young, you're earliest. And headed up the Timber Frame Guild. Many years, yes. Anton. There's not much to say about Anton, except he's everywhere when you need help.
He comes from a good family.
So Anton, he was part of the ambulance service at Alstead. I didn't know we called it ambulance service back in 2005 because when you had an ambulance, I didn't know we had, but emergency management. And he was on the scene at the get-go and had some tough times, as he thinks. But his work through the orchard school, the orchard farm, the bakery, it's all about building community, and so he's on this panel. And our last speaker, which I don't know, Arlene Magoon, she was the volunteer coordinator for the New Hampshire Homeland Security and Emergency Management. And I understand people really appreciated everything you did. And her job was to bring people together, helping community agencies to create a process with which survivors can access resources for recovery. So she was like the go-to person. So that's our panel. And I'm asking first to speak 5 minutes on a couple guiding questions, which I'll read to you. Recognizing the major urgent challenges that the town was facing, how did you approach your role? Where did you look for help? What gave you encouragement? And what helped you keep going? And you can share some stories if you wish at the time. And number 2, do you think our community became stronger through this difficult recovery process? And if so, could you share your thoughts on why? So why don't we just start around the table? Matt, you want to go first?
First thing I'll say is that the news was full of what was going on in New Orleans with Katrina at the time, and that was an amazing head start for how to think about something like this, for me anyway. And I remember at the beginning of all this, on Sunday morning, when I finally got to the town hall, and that's a long story I will skip tonight, but once the state police got there and things started happening, I never quite felt so useless. I had nothing to do. So I had to find something to do. So what I spent a week doing was walking up and down the debris channel among the people who were also walking up and down the debris channel and offering what I could emotionally to these shattered people. The dumb vacancy in the faces was striking, and I'm sure mine was one of them. And that was basically my job. And by Friday, I found myself at the town hall in front of this guy, and I was full. I was done. I couldn't. And Joel said, "Go home. Come back Monday." And that was among the best advice I ever had from somebody in my life in circumstances. And then after that, once things got really rolling, it was amazing to watch. Immediately on Sunday, there were excavators in the cold river near Millet Green hauling cars out. And the just upwelling of help that came from slightly distant, just like Langdon, was amazing to watch. And I had nothing to do with it. It was just happening. At some point, I started writing down on a piece of paper everything I saw written on the side of a vehicle. And there were like 67 different places these things had come from Manchester and Nashua and all over the place. And it was all wonderful. And there's one little story that comes after all this wonderfulness. From one of these first responsive guys, we got a bill for $57,000.
You're still not quite over there, are you?
Anyway, so that was a little wrinkle in all of it. I was talking about something else, but anyway. And then there were donations of cleaning supplies and rakes and shovels and brushes and antiseptics and all this kind of stuff headed to a particular room in the hotel. Donations and so forth. And I stopped in there one day, and there were people in there, and they were all this kind of stuff. And on the table, with something on top of it, was a case of anise. Bulbs of anise. And where did this come from? Well, the grocery store sent it. And somebody said, "Well, what do we do with it?" And I said, "Well, it's very good roasted with potatoes and carrots." But what we do with it, fennel is the word I'm looking for. Fennel, yeah. Is I don't know what we do with this in a flood, but I laughed for the first time. It was just terrific. But what happened when we were all in the community thinking about the exact same thing? It meant that we were also not thinking about other things. And it's the other things that divide us. And the focus in those days the result was much, much greater than the sum of its parts. Because with all that energy focused, and, underlaid by tremendous loss and pain, still the coming together and the focus of the energy created amazing things. And one thing rolled on to another. I remember being near the front door of the town offices and talking to a tall, thin man in a V-neck sweater. And he said, "Why aren't you in Concord?" I said, "Why would I be in Concord?" I think he was the head lobbyist for the Car Dealers Association in New Hampshire. And I said, "Why? What's with Concord?" He said, "That's where the money is." So anyway, we went to Concord and things happened back then.
Yeah.
So that might be my 5 minutes.
Pretty close. Thank you, man.
Thank you.
Good role model. Joe.
Excuse me.
I put that just before you, Joe. Go ahead. Give it a shot.
This is mostly nonsense. I'd like to offer a counter interpretation.
Go right ahead.
Yeah. We've been doing this a long time, and it's not getting any easier. But you, well, no, that's not the way to say that. Half of you, fully half of you, will not be surprised to discover that more than half of the heroes in this story, in this drama, are women. Like this one. Perhaps like Susan Norlander, right there. And then there's that woman over there who ran the Red Cross right into the ground on our behalf. And then there's that tall woman back there.
She's putting my hand up.
She was putting your hand up? Well, she doesn't have to, because I can still remember your name, because you've been such a pain in the ass for so long. But that woman right there, Mary Ann Jackson Wolf, raised and distributed more money in this town for private aid than FEMA spent. Did it with very little help, no supervision, I'd like to point out, in case the feds. So that was pretty good. Thank you very much, ladies, for holding it together, because we weren't. And I don't have any memory of anything that went on for the next 2 years and 6 months, but if there are male heroes in this drama, there's some of them here, but really Bill Moran was the best selectman this town ever had. When I started recruiting him over the really sincere and forceful objections of his wife. She was right, of course, but he said, well, you know, I'm really good with spreadsheets and difficult people, which is, he didn't actually use the phrase difficult people, but you have an imagination. And that turned out to be true, didn't it? Yeah. So he carried the ball for a long time with people who were really, really twisted by their experience and needed some care that I don't think you and I were able to provide, because we were distracted with nuts and bolts and diesel fuel and firemen from 16, 18 communities. Just arguing power line workers from 3 states. So Bill Moran was good at that, but you know who was even better was the governor. And he was a pretty good governor anyway, because after he'd been there 2 years, nobody could remember what party John Lynch belonged to, which is my idea of a governor. He was pretty good, and he had a gift for bringing people to see a part of themselves that was better than what they were accustomed to displaying on a regular basis. And he's the only reason this town got electricity in 6 weeks instead of 16 weeks. Really, the only reason. We watched him close the door on the fire station during a big multi-state union dispute about work hours for power line workers. And what emerged from that was kumbaya, somehow, and electricity. So lots of heroes, lots of credit to go around, and very little of it reflects on us. But this woman over here, that guy over there, you did some major league suffering on our behalf. Perhaps you won't talk about that.
Can't remember. It's too long.
Can't remember. That's a good answer. I've been telling people lately that everything that's wrong with America is wrong with Alstead on scale. So if you imagine that there were people in our community who didn't rise to the occasion, who successfully or unsuccessfully gamed the system, who wailed mightily about and bemoaned their outcast state, and talked endlessly to TV cameras from away about how terrible things were. Those people do exist in our community. And in my experience, they were not transformed into angelic human beings by this experience. Part of what I may have learned from this, or may have learned somewhere else, was that events of great magnitude don't transform people. I think what they do is they magnify what's already there. And that, as you can see, I'm sort of headed in the direction of saying, and that kind of cuts both ways. So. But we were blessed, I think. We were fortunate to have the visceral skill of not particularly being able to remember to take offense. That helped a lot. One of the governing principles of this select board and prior select boards is that people really need to be heard, which is different than me agreeing with them or accepting their worldview. People really do need to be heard. And the wretched and the frightened among us are, and the hateful among us, are neither more nor less perfected human beings than we are. And we lose sight of that at our peril as a community and as neighbors. So that's my shtick. Any questions?
No, very
Right,
much.
so, okay, hey, thank you. All right, well, Arlene?
Sure.
She's got a list.
Well,
You already
give up
named
different
some of the-
styles, Joe.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I steal your
You did.
thunder?
He was
Well, let's
reading this
cross them off. You don't have to say anything nice about Mary Ann, God knows. That's all.
Say it again.
Once is enough, really.
So I came on the scene as working for the state, Homeland Security, and the only reason why I came was because I was the only one in the office who had experience with volunteers. I had been hired by the state to work on creating a cadre of volunteers for H1N1. Does anybody remember that?
Yeah.
And we all sat in the office and said, there's never going to be a pandemic. So what are we doing this for? And I had been there 4 months, and I was just about ready to go to my boss and say, I know you hired me to coordinate volunteers, but there are not going to be volunteers who want to go out when there's a pandemic. And I knew that I was going to get fired, so I was getting ready for that. And then this event happened, and the governor called our office and said, send somebody down there who has volunteer experience. And they said, you go there. Where is Alstead? I don't even know. So I ended up in Keene to begin with, and the governor was there. Yeah, the governor was there. And he called in all of the voluntary organizations in the area, everything from Alstead to Keene to Walpole, whoever had a voluntary organization or a social service organization, they were asked to come to this restaurant in Keene. And I went, and I was sitting next to the governor, and he was a little guy, I was really surprised about that. He was my height, so I'm looking right at him. But I just sat there, and he goes around this room, and there must have been 50, 60 people. Went around the room, and he started asking them, who are you, and what are you going to do to help people in this event? And so I took out a pen and paper, and I started writing down names and who they were, thinking, well, I'll give this to the governor later, maybe he needs this. And he went all the way around the room, and he looks at me right in the eye, and he says, and who are you, and what are you going to do?
Oh.
I said, oh, my name is Arlene Magoon. I work for you, sir, because I work for Homeland Security, and I'm going to make sure all these people do what they say they were going to do. I don't know where that came from. He says, I want to see you after. So after, I stood eye to eye with him, and he said, so here's my cell phone number. I'm going to be giving this out to everybody else, too, who needs help. You know, he was the first governor in our country to ever do something like that. And so when people had an issue, they called the governor. And who do you think the governor called then? So, I remember a lot of weekends sitting at home with my family and getting a call from the governor and jumping up from the table. Yes, sir. Yes, yes, sir. I'm on it. Several people from Alstead would ask him for help. And I worked only with people, so I didn't work roads and bridges. All of that was being taken care of by these guys over here. I hope.
Look around.
I know. So that was how I actually really got into disaster. I didn't know what I was going to do. Because here on one side I had all these volunteers from these amazing organizations that were already saying, okay, well, we have some money and we have some volunteers and we have some resources, but how was I going to organize that and get it to the people? We went to a big meeting where all of these organizations came back, and we were waiting for the people from FEMA to come. And I waited, and I got all these people in the room, and there's a lot of officials there, and I'm like sweating bullets because where is this FEMA woman? And I get a little phone call. Hi, I'm not coming. I'm having a panic attack. I'm on the side of the road. I said, what do you think I'm having? So here I was. I had very limited understanding of how do I pull all this together. But I told the situation. I knew what the situation was, the situation report, about how many people were affected, how much money it's going to cost to get everybody back into homes, and what the losses were. So I went through all of that, and then I explained to them what long-term recovery was. When people were able to go to one place, tell what their issues were, and then they would be worked with a case manager to get that done. So a person didn't have to tell their story a bazillion different times, right? So that's what I explained, and then I stood there like this. And I don't know if anybody knows Ellen Avery. Ellen Avery used to work for the United Way in Keene, and she's like looking around like this. I see her. She's like, and she goes, I have a question. I said, yes. What's your question? She says, are you mean to say that we have to create a long-term recovery group? I said, yes, that's what we need to do. And she's, all right. So she stood there and she picked out the people that she knew, because when you live in a community like this, you know people. Yeah, right. And she put them into groups. The money group, the resource group, the people group. And all of a sudden it started coming together. Wow. Because that's what living in this area is. Now I've gone on after that experience. I was here for 2 years helping people, just connecting people. I didn't do anything. It was all of the people who worked at the Red Cross, we had the CAP agency where Bill Marcello, I don't know if any of you remember Bill Marcello, he was amazing. The CAP agency that provided lots of money and some resources and certainly volunteers. We had a great person at the Keene Sentinel who was always reporting about what was happening in Alstead and Keene and other areas that kept it alive.
Jake.
Yeah, Jake.
What was his last name?
I don't know what Jake's last name. Does anyone remember Jake's last name?
Barry.
Thank you. So there were a lot of different people that came together. There was Carol Ann Center, who came together during Christmas time. Now, she knew that kids were going to get some stuff for Christmas, but she actually thought of the adults who lost the tools that you were talking about, that they lost in their garages and whatever. So she wrapped them up in a bow and in Christmas paper and gave them to people for Christmas. It was such a touching thing for her to do. Then there was Eileen Fernandez. Eileen Fernandez was the case manager. And she came together and she listened to what anybody had to say. And she figured out how to pull this whole thing together. So it wasn't just me. I am just a liaison. I just put people together. And it was all these really strong people that were able to make a difference in the community. And the difference is amazing. I met some great people. I still meet with Marianne and several others for Christmas every year since the disaster. Now, I went on, after my 2 years were up here, I went on and I took that woman's place in FEMA. Yeah, I did. They offered me a lot of money because of what I did here. They said, how did you do that? And I said, well, I wrote it all down. So it was the basis for how they do long-term recovery now in FEMA. As a matter of fact, HSEM won an award in 2007 for creating long-term recovery here in Alstead. So there was a lot of things that happened here that affected not only here, but affected the rest of the country. And as far as Marianne, I have one more story. I got one more story. Marianne was working like crazy, and she was super stressed, and she wanted me to help her find an AmeriCorps Vista person to work with her. And I was working so hard to try to figure all of that out. And I went up to the Alstead offices to tell her that I'm still working on it. And she says, do you have my Vista person? And I said, well, no. She says, then out, get out. And I went out my car and I cried. And then
nice. Nice going.
Then I learned that there's no crying in disaster.
Selfish.
There's no crying in disaster, so that's what my biggest learn. But Mary and I is still very good friends.
Thank you, Early. That's great.
Anton,
take it home.
I don't know, that's a hard act to follow. That's amazing. Well, it's interesting because I was not in a leadership position at that time in terms of the ambulance. I later went on to become captain, but at that time, I had just been on the ambulance for 1 year. And so I was really just one of those people who had no idea at the beginning of that night what we were in for.
Yeah.
And how quickly things change, right? Like, I had gone to a concert in Brattleboro on Saturday evening with friends, driven through the flats, and the water was just starting to come onto the road. Now, it had been raining for a long time, and it had rained hard that day, but I had the thought, well, that's very odd that the water is coming up onto the road here. This doesn't happen normally. But, it wasn't like thinking this is about to be a disaster. And it wasn't until later that night when my pager started going off and all personnel come to, just be at the station. And so I came, and at that point it was feeling really like everyone had this sense of like something big was building, but it hadn't happened yet, so there was a real strange disconnect with, okay, you have to get cots down and we're going to have people evacuated and they're going to be brought here and you need to set up for them. And we only had a few people show up that night, but there was already that sense of really people being displaced. And I remember one family had a cat carrier that they came into. We were in the town hall, and it just felt so kind of like, what do you do for people who are being told, like, get out now? And one of the experiences I had that night that really, I had come in about 10 o'clock, and around 2 in the morning, we had like done a certain amount of preparation, and it was raining hard, and I kept hearing what I thought was thunder, and I walked out of the station and started walking down towards the library, and it got louder and louder, and it was at a certain point that I realized it wasn't thunder, it was the boulders being carried down the river. And at that point, the Millet Green was already starting to flood and was coming up. And it was around, I don't know, 5:30 that we were told that the people, they'd been going up and telling people to evacuate above the town, but now we were being told, okay, we need to get people to evacuate below, so from the library down. And we were sent out in crews together. And the one experience that I had, first there were some of those new homes built along the river, and we knocked on the door and woke this family up, and they said, "What do you mean we have to get out? We just came here from Florida to get away from the hurricane." And yeah, and then a few houses down, and I don't remember the name, but the folks there, the woman was very elderly and was wheelchair bound, and we needed to get her out. And as we were starting, she said, "Well, wait, my purse is in the bedroom." And so 2 of us went, and as we went through into the back of the house, we could see the floor of the house was already like waving up and down because the river had completely eroded under their home. And so, you know, I don't think we stayed. But, so there was that initial sort of, you know, this is really getting bigger than any of us realized. And I guess, you know, in terms of recovery and how it built community, like for those of us who were on the ambulance and in the fire department, those first few weeks we basically lived at the station. So we were sent from, I was in the village during the flooding itself, but that afternoon we were sent with the ambulance to man the east because basically things were cut off and separated. And it took us, and I was trying to remember as I was looking at pictures how the heck we got from the village out to Route 12, because we had to go out to 12 and through Keene, and then, yeah, it took us a long time to get back just, you know, the 5 miles or so. But we lived at the station for several weeks. We had cots. Fortunately, I was just a half mile from my house, so I did get to sneak away and go take showers and things. Which I remember we had National Guard stationed there as well for the first week or so. But there was a strong sense of that it was making a difference to be able to, like our biggest job during the day after was going out and trying to get to places where nobody had phone service. And so we were doing checks, right? And going and knocking on doors and making sure people were okay. And sometimes, because people felt really isolated. You know, they were unable to go places, and so it was very, like, people were often welcoming and wanting to talk about their experience, and so we ended up just, you know, having times where getting to meet people and being with them and kind of letting them speak about their experience of the flood and how it felt. And sometimes we had to, you know, make sure people were okay and bring medicine or things or get them out. But most of the time it was just, you know, somebody there to talk to. And that really made an impression on all of us. I think that because a lot of time when you do the ambulance service, you are going and serving people, but you're there in a very dramatic situation, and you're usually bringing them to the hospital and dropping them off, and that's it. Right? And here we were going day after day to do these checks and getting to see people and be there. So I think in terms of community, that really was powerful to be there in that way.
Thank you, Anton.
Yeah.
A follow-up question, just maybe 2 minutes quickly around, is another community has a similar type of crisis. We watch it on TV every night, right? Florida, somewhere. And a local community member leader comes and says, "You've gone through a lot now, Alstead. Give us some words of wisdom. How do we just give me something. I need it now." Could you give maybe just 2 minutes your thoughts? What do you take away that you might share with other people who just this, you didn't ask for this, it's just pushed in your face. Maybe you did lower it. But everybody else. What words of wisdom would you give?
You go.
Anywhere you want. Just got 2 minutes. It's short.
That's 2 minutes.
Yeah. Well, you got other share stories.
Well, I was thinking, I think about this a lot, but in the context of the flood and the 2.5 or 3 years of recovery, that in many of our experiences were the best years of our lives in terms of belonging to a community. Mm-hmm. It has been fashionable in this country and in this town and in select board meetings every damn Tuesday night to stand up and say all government is corrupt and incompetent. And we didn't actually discover that that was true, did we?
No.
Every one of those cubicles in Concord and Keene is filled with a technocrat with a skill set that we needed, and with exactly the right attitude. Often they're crippled by infrastructure and lack of resources and a regulatory environment that would make the pharaoh faint. But we learned a lot of cool things about government, and and FEMA was on its very best behavior. They were terrific. They were genuinely terrific. I mean, not politically terrific, but extra mile terrific.
So what would you tell them? Give me some advice. I need help.
Trust your institutions.
Oh, radical.
Ask them for help. Don't expect them to read your minds. DOT. People in New Hampshire hate DOT because they tend to put a driveway through your grandfather's farm. They were the best.
I think that our experience would be completely different and a lot worse. Because what I've listened to tonight...
This is the Matt I remember.
...sort of all gets back to John Lynch, the governor.
There you go.
It matters, though.
Oh, he was in a plane headed to Germany when he heard about this, and they turned the plane around. And he was here the next day.
Wow.
But anyway, with what he did in that firehouse with the cable people and the electric people and the phone people and the culvert people and all the, he'd say, when can you have your part done? Thursday? How about Tuesday? Okay. And then he lined it all up. It was, what he did for a living was he turned around bankrupt companies. That's what he did. Roll it all over and change the, just make it work. And he did that. And we never saw a bill for the tremendous and months-long cleanup of the debris, which was as far away as the Arch Bridge at Aubuchon's. There was debris there, and there was the cornfields on the other side of River Street. All that, it was all sort of landed. It got flat there, and everything sort of dropped. And it was the governor. It was the governor. It was with you, it was the governor. And it would have been completely different. And I talked in my first talk tonight about how it all just sort of happened around us. We didn't do it.
That's true.
We went with it, but we didn't do it. And without John, without John Lynch, it would have been a completely different story.
An experience like that or advanced age, the more time that passes, the less false our modesty becomes. It's really genuine. Really. There's a bunch of heroes.
Arlene,
So, like I said, after the Alstead, I finally went to FEMA, and I've been to many disasters all across the country. And I have to echo what Matt was saying, is that in those disasters where the governors were not paying attention, I had such a hard time. I had a horrible time. I could name a bazillion states that I've been through. South Carolina was one of them that was really difficult because the governor wasn't on board with what we were doing. So it's really difficult. Then the other thing that I would say to a person who's trying to recover from a disaster is you don't do it alone. You do it with a lot of other people. You find out what their strengths are and you capitalize on them. And everybody who participates in that way grows. I would say that all of the people in our group that helped have gone on to doing some great things even after the disaster, made them better people as well. Except for, well, but anyways, so that's what I would say, is use other people. Yeah.
And Tony, any words of advice for someone who's as it's coming towards them?
Well, I guess I like this idea of you don't do it yourself. And I think there's something about, even in the really difficult situation, and it's very possible to start feeling victimized by your situation. But if you can turn that to what is the opportunity in this moment to create something new, better, different, like a lot of times there's that potential in a situation that's disaster, but it has, the potential for something new, different. So to kind of switch the mindset to what's possible rather than...
Jim,
Well,
may I say one thing?
Sure, please.
He said the word victim, and I think...
Oh, could you come up here and say it? So,
Oh, sure.
it's not. Briefly.
Yes.
Not her.
No, the flood families feel very victimized, and it's difficult for them at first to feel like survivors. I survived this. I'm not a victim. I'm going to be a survivor. And one of the things that helped them here in Alstead was the Friday night flood family meetings. None of us thought of this. Rock Wilson thought of it. And Rock Wilson sent out posters, or however he did it. And and so I've known Rock since he was my snowplow kid. And I said, may I come? Because he didn't trust these bureaucrats.
Rightly so.
And he said, no TV people, no selectmen, and no clergy. I'm like, okay. So we filled the town hall, and I'd been like a volunteer for like 2 days, I don't know, and or maybe 20 days. And they went around the room and introduced themselves to each other, and I thought, oh, they don't know each other. For some reason, it was so much easier to think of them as eggs in a carton,
Right.
But no, they didn't know each other. Why would they? And so what these guys did do, they did an amazing job, is after that first meeting, they were allowed to come, and the flood families, the flood families had questions and concerns and things they needed to know to move forward, and we wouldn't have known that, So these guys were on the griddle every Friday night. And whatever they didn't know, they said, we're not going to bullshit you. We don't know the answer, but we will find the people to get the answer. And the other thing I have to say, that was, you need to involve the people. And in saying that, I worked Tropical Storm Irene in Vermont, and that was not a really good experience for me. I was used to this. And of course that affected the whole state. If, as your question is, what would you say to someone who needs help? You've got to break it down into manageable bites. You know, a neighborhood, because every neighborhood has a church, they have a school, because you need to find these people, you need to break it down, you can't do it. They broke it down into counties. Like, you can't assign 6 people like me to figure out what's wrong with the entire county. So you need to break every disaster down into manageable bites and involve the survivors.
Thank you very much.
You're very welcome.
I'd like to end with a quote I heard from FDR, how he got us out of the Great Depression, the crisis. And the media came to him and said, what's your strategy? What's your creative problem-solving system you use? And FDR said, during a crisis, you do something. When it doesn't work, you do something else. And you did a lot, and thank you. Let's thank the panel. All right, we have scheduled right now, let's see if I have this right, 15-minute break. And can you announce what we have for books
For our
and
contestants.
CDs? Okay, we have books and CDs that you can get. The book, Too Much Water, Too Much Rain. My daughter was one of the contributors in high school, and we'll hear about that more in the next panel. And Water Rising. All back there. So these are both available for donations, and all the donations will go to Alstead Historic Society.
Nice.
So they're on the table, and we have some cookies and drinks, cider from Anton's place. So let's take a 15-minute break. Thank you. That was really great. All right, now grab a seat, and we have our second panel. It's this panel is a little shorter because it's shorter. 3, you're not 4. Great. All right. So we have 3 individuals, probably not, okay, who will share how they documented the recovery through poetry, music, interviews, and a book. Okay, and you've seen the book, and I'll open your book of poetry, so that's great. So our panel members, make sure I get their introduction properly. Okay. So first, Audrey Henderson. Okay. She will share some of her poetry with us tonight. She's a well-known poet, and her work is published widely in the U.S. and in Scotland, where she grew up. Paul Rodrigue, which is an old friend I haven't seen, I saw ski jump, but not for a long time, is a therapist and a previous resident of Alstead. And he completed interviews with residents, and with that, created a CD with another individual, Charlie Brady, who made the music, called Water Rising, and that's available for you too by donation. And the last one is David Moody, and everyone probably knows David Moody here. A member of the Alstead Historical Society, and in 2005 was able to acquire money from the History Channel. To put together a team and support students from the Paul Badger High School to write this wonderful book. And so and he coached, advised, so thank you very much. So, and my daughter was one of those high school kids. So, all right, so why don't we start with Audrey? And the focus question I have is basically, what did you do? And I understand you'll share some poetry.
Sure.
So thank you.
Yes. So we were part-time residents in Alstead, and our first weekend fully with plates and a cooker and the utensils was the weekend of the flood. And we are at 30 Cobb Hill Road, which is literally the first house above the culvert. So a number of people have mentioned being sent to do something, like Arlene was sent to do the mission. I kind of have a sense of being airlifted into this situation, like a a pin in a Google map, just landing and having looking out the window to the flats and thinking, I don't think this is a lake, but that sure looks like one, but it can't be. So that situates me in the story. I've read these poems to do with the flood in various parts of the country and overseas, and I actually feel that this moment is the poem coming home to its origin, and there'll never be a more precious audience for it. So it's just wonderful to be able to read it. Just to set another piece of context, it's also slightly terrifying reading the poem to the people who were in the middle of the event. So I just want to have a little bit of poetic explaining. The first poem it starts with Alstead and its residents, but it sort of morphs in a slight fantastic, into fantasy mode, and we go to New Orleans and into the wider, the other places worldwide that have experienced that are in the 10 Inches of Rain Club. And so the guy at the end of that first sequence, he's kind of a mean guy with a backhoe, and I just want to make it 1,000% clear that is no one in this town. He's a metaphorical, he's a symbolic kind of Grim Reaper character. So just to be clear, that is no one here. Okay, so a little chilly. Anyway, so the first poem is called Terminus, and I think I wrote it on the way home in the car, just after we got through up Cobb Hill Road and went to Charlestown, and someone had fixed enough road for us to drive on. So it's fresh. It was written freshly. Terminus. I can tell you that the road is gone. I can tell you that the houses are gone and the gas station, but you will not understand until you step on the tarmac and it crumbles, and you will say, the road is gone. The houses are gone. Their gardens, their petunias and photographs are sucked into the brown roar. There is no more lawn. And I need wood to burn. Is it unseemly to pick up house timbers? People may want to caress their house timbers, to rock them in their arms and sing to them. Tom gives us firewood. I do not know Tom. Pam brings us sausage. I do not know Pam. The food is warm. The end of the world is on our doorstep. People stare at it. You cannot go any further, they say. No one has information. No one knows whether the whole world is gone, or half the world, or 1/1,000,000th of it. We are solemn and gingerly by the precipice. The night is new to us. The night is a balm. We sit on the rooftops and wait. The stars are bluish white, like breast milk. We count the drops falling. Do they hum on the way down? Sleep, baby. Rest your head on the hatchet. Sleep, babies. Once upon a time there was a heaven. Will someone tell us what is happening? Someone in the next town has a radio. Someone in the next town said Texas is gone. Someone else said no, the polar ice cap is gone, 2 pieces twice the size of Texas. We look at the water for answers, like the polar bear, like the man from Plaquemine. There is a rumbling, there is a roar, a huge vehicle. We admire the yellow maw, the many-angled tire, a backhoe. The driver smiles and says, "Didn't I just see you in Pakistan? Didn't I just see you in New Orleans?" We say, "No, sir, this is New Hampshire." He laughs out loud and long. We repeat, "This is New Hampshire." He replies, still laughing, "Rubble is rubble, all powder and bits of cable, nothing recognizable but the smell." Then these are snapshots at periodic intervals afterwards. The houses were crumpled in a casual way, There, a kitchen with a tree inside, roots and stones and earth lay in strata beside the refrigerator next to spray paint, marking the evacuation hour. Interior colors, bed sheets bumped against a lawnmower, a snowblower, a rototiller, grass clippings, and oil. 2. I heard the machines, heard the engines groan, the air grew blue with diesel fumes. Front loaders tipped whole households into trucks, all the artifacts turning in an arc through the air, the dolls, the television set, the old toaster full of crumbs and burnt cheese. 3. The valley smells of earth. The places where houses had been are smoother, grooved with caterpillar treads, covered with fist-sized boulders, and small, spontaneous memorials, usually a flag, a seasonal token, such as is available, a pumpkin, for instance, and later Christmas foliage and ribbon. 4. We were hungry for the mercy of snow, for the jagged shapes to be rounded, for the unnatural breaches where waters suddenly stretched, shallows and sheets, to be made narrow again by frost and freeze, for the slackened and loosened hillsides to be made fast again, icicled, stanched. In the end, it fell silently all night, throughout the hours of darkness, perfect flake upon perfect flake, until the morning became luminous, and the morning field was spangled, and there were fox prints under the apple tree. 5, a year the following summer. Odd, lonesome metals on the ground, carburetors, complex cast machine parts, slabs of rodent heaps, a tailpipe wound around some yellow line, a smell like the beach. What the beach is, dissolved stone, stone rinsed down to minerals. The world lays down a new memory, and crabgrass. 6. Someone has gathered all the man-made things, useless things, plastic coat hangers with the hooks gone, plastic holly stems, artificial evergreens, radial tires, an act of apology to the old order. Someone has planted an American flag on top. At the temporary garage, a buckled, salvaged sign, surfing letters spelling the word G-U-L-F, Gulf. That's it.
Thank you, Audrey. Yep. Oh, would you like to?
I don't want to follow that up. Wow.
About 5 minutes. I know.
Thank you for that.
That was beautiful.
That was remarkable. Like,
Yeah.
it felt like plunging back into those times and just bringing up memories of different experiences.
Right.
Yeah, thank you. Well, it's nice to be here with all of you. It's great to see old friends and faces. So for those of you who don't know me, I used to live right next to Vilas School, which was kind of the end point of a lot of the road destruction that happened on Route 123. I got to see the last of the telephone poles going down. So one of the things that was hard for me was wanting to contribute. And I didn't have a tractor, nor did I know how to run one. And I just so admired the ability of so many folks to be moving big piles of stuff with their machines, you know. And given that I'm a therapist, I thought, well, maybe one way that I could contribute is to collect stories and talk to people and listen. So I started to think about how I might do that, and I well, I thought of Terry Gross, of course, and she makes it seem so easy, so I thought, well, how hard can this be to invite people to, you just have to really get them talking and then you sit back, right? It was much harder than I thought it would be. But part of the idea initially that I had was not just to collect people's stories, but because, each person has their own individual story specific to the location that they were in, what was happening right there and at that time. But the flood was so much bigger. The story of the flood was bigger than any one person. And so it seemed important to find a way to bring together the different stories that people had to offer and collect them into the larger story of the flood that could be told, or that the story could describe what happened over the course of 18 hours, 20 hours, in such a broad set of locations. So luckily, my friend's initial skepticism about this didn't dissuade me from doing that. But luckily, one of my friends had some connections with public radio, and he told me about David Isay. For those of you who don't know him, he's the person behind StoryCorps. And before that, he had done this project called Ghetto Life 101, in which he gave two young boys, or teenage boys, who lived in the projects in Chicago, recording equipment and sent them in to talk to people. And the stories are amazing. And that helped me kind of get this idea of how to craft together a sort of a running narrative based on the passage of time, but kind of crafting together the little bits and pieces of interviews to try to create a chronological presentation of the flood over the distances that it was influencing. And then the Historical Society was wonderfully supportive and got us the recording equipment we needed. Back then we couldn't do it with phones.
The recorder that NPR uses, it was professional quality device, which was wonderful to have you use.
Yeah, it was so funny to be working with digital. This was the time, right, where we were really moving from
analog to
digital. Yeah. And then Charlie Brady, my neighbor, who was a musician and had this amazing software program on his computer to do all kinds of recording. And I don't know why he agreed to partner with me on this. I think at some point he probably had some regrets because it took an awful lot of time. I'd go and talk to people for an hour or more and then go back to Charlie's house and we'd download that and then start parsing it out, going through the interviews and finding ways to get rid of the ums and the strange gaps of time or the background noise which we didn't want there. And he was a great technical assistant there in the effort. The fun part was really identifying those little bits and pieces of the interview that were going to link up really well together. I was just listening to it the other day in preparation for this, and I was pleased that it still holds up, I think. It kind of does a good job of representing a lot of what happened that night. One of the other things that I thought of one time after listening to it was realizing we captured New Hampshire accents that probably won't be with us for many more generations. There's so many wonderful local accents there. Yeah. I guess the other thing I would just mention is that one of the things that surprised us was how well it was received. We didn't know what to expect. You know, we were financing this, at least the CD aspect of it, we financed it on our own. And we were burning, you know, burning individual CDs for the first batch of 100. And they sold so well that within days we were able to figure out how to professionally have them produced. And I think we ordered 1,200 CDs and were able to sell most of those. And we were able to donate the funds to the Alstead flood relief. So that's how I got to know Mary Ann and got to work with her an awful lot that way. So yeah, it was a fun project to work on, to try to create that sense of knitting things together in the spirit of community.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah.
So David.
My turn.
Yeah, share what happened. What happened?
What happened? What happened? Gene and I had been out the night before at a church event over in Vermont. And of course, we came out in this horribly drenching rain. So I remember going over the Arch Bridge at Walpole and thinking, this looks like kind of high water. It's about 10 o'clock. And of course, I had no idea what was going on upstream. We got home, went to bed. The next morning, I had services at church to attend to. And I drove my car down to the foot of the drive, and there was a 3-foot by 3-foot river running across my driveway. We live on the other side of Prentice Hill in the Camp Brook drainage area. So the water was overflowing Camp Brook, and instead of going across the street into the marsh and then back down Camp Brook Road, it was cutting across my driveway. And I knew the car couldn't get across there. So I went back up to my office and called the church sexton to tell him I wouldn't be there. And in the middle of the call, the power went out. And then the phone went dead. So we knew something was afoot related to the rain and the storm. Now, a couple of weeks before, we had received from the Save Our History program, that's a granting program of the History Channel, a form, an application to put in for a grant that would involve historical societies working with kids, with students and non-college age kids, high school students. And I remember looking at it and saying, well, this is kind of not something we could really compete with. It is big cities with big projects, and we were a tiny little historical society with no track record and that kind of work. But then the flood hit, and it occurred to us that we really had an opportunity here, maybe to convince them that a small rural community in New Hampshire that had had probably the worst catastrophe in 250 years of history strike us, and we should fill it out. So I dug out my 9-page grant application that I'm looking at now, that we wrote in the course with a great deal of collaboration and cooperation from teachers at Ball Mountain and Alstead Primary, librarians and others, to put together a package for a $9,840 grant from the History Channel. And we got it done because it was due in 2 weeks, and we had, and the flood occurred, and then we had 2 weeks to get it in. So we thought, well, prayer and a wing, you know, and then we would go ahead and do it. I just would like to read one component of the grant, because in rereading it, I thought it was apropos. The question was, how will the proposed project raise awareness among students and community members about the significance of their local heritage and the importance of historical preservation? So our answer was, in a time of electronic media, television, and the internet, students will learn the importance of the written word in recording historic events. They will gain personal, hands-on experience in creating their own primary sources and interpreting other sources that they are involved in collecting. Through this experience, they will learn how to preserve documents and artifacts for future generations. Perhaps most importantly, through hands-on involvement in many aspects of the project, students will develop a sense of pride in their town and region and an understanding of how they, their parents, and town coped with adversity. And I think that really sums up the project pretty well. The Historical Society, in effect, really did very little of the major work. It was in the hands of students. And giving control of a project over to students was an act of faith. But they did, I think, admirably. We had 110 students involved in total from the primary and the Alstead and Silas Middle School and the Fall Mountain. We had fourth graders from Judy Checky's class, sixth graders from Linda Ferlin's class at primary, and then Tanya Lincoln, who was an English professor, great help, had her honor class participate in this. So there was perhaps 50 kids from Fall Mountain. And the beauty of it was that surfacing out of her class were three leaders. The Creek sisters, Sandra and Emily, and then Ian Relhan, who was a junior at the time. And we started meeting with them, and Lark Leonard and Taffy Brown joined us later to work on photographs. And we sort of heard their plans and sort of said, yeah, do more. And they came up with the outline. But one of the beauties of this book is the combination of things that are involved. The separators between sections have colored strips down the side, and on those sides, on those strips, are quotes from the essays of children who wrote about the flood. Oh. My dad's old truck ended up in the yard of the person he bought it from. Molly, age 11. And that's, of course, where the book title came from. The fire chief's daughter, when asked, what is a flood? She said, too much water, too much rain. Now, normally you would say, it being a good hydrologist, well, you have to have rain before you have too much water, and so it should be too much rain, too much water. It doesn't have that poetic. So that was the title of the book. In our proposal, we said we would come up with a book, which was published in 2006 within, and the grant ran from January to July. So we produced a book about the flood in less than 12 months. Oral histories. We had 27 recordings made by Fall Mountain Historical Society, plus the ones that Paul did on his CD. Paul came and addressed the kids prior to their going out, because we thought he was the expert on making oral histories. But he could advise on how to approach. and did a wonderful job. The kids set up a station at the library with big signs, come in and tell your stories. And they recorded each one. So the archive you see before you, the pictures, over 9,000 pictures, of which about 1,000 are produced here. Read Taffy's little introduction, because it tells you how she saw the pictures.
Well, this is a perfect moment, because there's a fourth person at this table that's not here, which should be Taffy Brown. So I just wanted to say, because she had a significant role, Taffy Brown did, I wrote down that I'd like to recognize her because she solicited photos from all the residents of that community and tried to organize this incredible quantity of photographs to document with 26 panels what happened. This is an incredible amount of work. So I just think that she should be recognized here with you.
Absolutely,
and help with the book.
Absolutely. Because
And even her quilt here, which is this, you have noticed that artistic element here is the culvert that got jammed and twisted. And so as an artist, she sees how this be shown through art, and you see the side of the culvert. So I just want Taffy to be known that she contributed significantly. So can we thank this panel and Taffy Brown for... Thank you very much, all of you. We have about 20 minutes, and I'd like to open the floor, and I'd like David Wilbur from Marlow to have a chance to share about a minute or two each their stories they wish to share about the flood. And would you like to come up?
Well, it was...
Well, no. You can come up because we have...
No. Listen.
Yes.
The previous panel is exactly what we have to say, is that each of us had one little tiny part to play, and the people stood up and they took on whatever they could see in front of them and what they could make it better or help somebody or something. That's the secret thing here. The secret sauce is this is a community, and we're all in this together. None of us realized what we were getting into. We went to bed the night before, or we got up and Concord is looking, where's Alstead? It's off the map. We can't contact them. Where's Marlow? It's off the map. And so I was doing something very similar to Anton. I'm in Marlow. And I get down there, and the village pond's up across the highway a little. And this is really bizarre. And we activate the Emergency Operations EOC and get on the fire radio. We've lost 911 service. Get the ham radio back to Concord. And then they say, get over to Alstead. See if you can find a road into the town, and then report back to Concord about what's going on there. And so I got as far as Chase's Mill. I got here, and that was where it stopped. And then the state police helicopter came in. This officer jumps out with street shoes on, and I said, oh my, none of us are prepared for this. And it turned out to be a long ordeal after that. But that's how that started off. Well, and
thank you.
And we're in.
That's great. So, would anyone else like to share stories or reflections? You need to come up here because we are streaming. Ellen, come on. Yeah, there's a microphone here, so okay, you don't have to. It's a good mic.
This is a quick story. Our neighbors on Bly Road, Bill and Gloria Pearl, who normally live in New York City, were at some function in Alstead Center, I believe, the day of the flood, and they had to walk back all the way from Alstead Center to Bly Road up here, and they got to the brook across the washout on Camp Brook Road. And they couldn't go across, of course. Well, there was Lyle Bala with his excavator, and he saw their predicament, and he said, here, get in the bucket. So they climbed into the bucket, and he moved them over, and they went home. That's my story.
Thank you. Creativity, people have heavy equipment very high, too. Okay. Any other stories or things you'd like to share? Don't be shy. Margaret? Come on, come on.
All right.
Come on. I'll help you.
You wanna just,
I'll help you up here. You can sit down here.
No, I can
You can
sit-
sit down here, but this is my microphone right here. Great.
Thank you. Thanks for your help. We didn't live here quite then, in '05. We moved here in '07. But my mother had died. The house came to me. We, my husband and I, and son Nathan, who's here in the room somewhere, were here to work on the place. But there was no electricity. There was nothing for us to do but go sightseeing. So we went down, came down here in the hollow. We went down through Chris Madigan's field and across the brook. So I don't know how we got across the brook, but somehow we did. And I can remember seeing that water rushing by. You wouldn't have a chance in that water, right out there. Right, and you wouldn't have a chance. There was nothing to do but go sightseeing. So we went down and we jumped from chunk of road to chunk of road, hip high sometimes. Sometimes you went around because it was too far to jump. And we went all the way down, and Nathan, young man that he was, had to have his picture taken on the crumpled up culvert that was the sin of everything, the trouble with everything behind. It was quite a sight. It was quite an experience. We walked down about a couple miles, and then we came back and went up through the woods because it was easier going than up to Camper Road, because it was easier going than it was on the road.
Margaret, do you want to mention the water came over the road, but an outcome was?
Oh, the mill, thank you. The mill has benefited from what the state did afterward. The state didn't want to replace the road if we had another flood like that. And so they built a bypass culvert out here, and that saves the mill too. So we have the highway department to thank.
Yep.
Thank you.
I'll have to mention, as a civil engineer, Heman did have good relations with the DOT because they always wanted to widen the road, as you all remember. And finally they did widen the road, and they built that big concrete wall on the other side of the road, so they could widen it before the flood. So basically, DOT made a dam here to protect the mill, which was so. Even though everyone didn't want the road widened and more traffic, actually they kind of saved us to a certain degree. So you never know. What happened. You never know. Okay, anybody else like to share a story? All right. Well, I think
We should hear about Anton's dog.
Anton.
There's a dog. There's a story about a dog.
Anton, come on, tell us a story about your dog. Please, Anton.
Well, this is one story where I wasn't actually personally present. I was in the village, but the folks living at the farm, and at that time we had a dog, Mo. Mo loved the water, and he was the kind of dog that if you had a hose and you sprayed water in the air, he would jump and try and bite the water. So they came Sunday morning, took a walk down here to see what had happened, and Mo came, And at that time, the water had subsided below the road, but on the pond on the opposite side, there was a giant whirlpool. It was just like rushing in a circle and going under through the culvert and then coming out by the mill. Well, Mo thought that that was the most exciting thing. He'd seen him before anybody could stop him. He jumped and went in, went under. They saw him pop up on this side before he went over the falls, hit his head against the tree, and this lifeless body disappeared down the stream, and everybody got, oh no, Anton's dog dead, gone. We're going to have to tell Anton, and he's down there. Marty, who lives with us at the farm, he thought he'd go and see at least if he could find the dog's body down the stream. And so he starts climbing down this roadway that wasn't there, doing the climbing. And he gets about halfway down the hill, and there comes Mo trotting up. Somehow he'd come to and made his way out of that torrent of water. And I always said, well, he's no smarter than he ever was, but he did survive, so.
Anton, wasn't your daughter in the Peace Corps in Guatemala? And she was watching television and with some friends, and the storm, she was watching about the storm. She said, oh my God, that's my hometown. And then there was a picture of a dog, and she said, my God, that's my dog.
True story.
Guatemala.
She was in Guatemala, and it was on the news.
Oh my God.
I don't know if the part about Mo made it into that story, but that's a good ending.
All right. Is anyone else want to share something, or should we leave it on the dog story? All right.
Thank everybody. I thought this was just amazing.
Yes. All right. So thank you all. Thank you, panel. It's your no. And I'm going to invite up.
To continue the thank yous,
The closing.
panelists, the Historical Society for letting us use their materials, and the wonderful team that put this event together. I want to thank the Historical Society for donating books, and Paul and Charlie for donating Water Rising CDs, and Audrey for donating books, poetry. And I'd also like to thank the Bailey Foundation, who supported the Celebrate Water program for this summer. And the Shed Porter Library, who worked with us. We were co-sponsors together for this series of events. So thank you all for coming. And thank you to the people who are on live stream. And David, who made that possible. Be well. Good evening.
Thank you.